The wedding photos look perfect. She's radiant in white. You're beaming with pretty, and everyone's celebrating what appears to be the beginning of your happily ever after. Fast forward 5 years, and you're sitting in a lawyer's office, dividing assets and wondering how the woman who once made you feel like the luckiest man alive became the architect of your personal hell. You're not alone. Millions of men walk down the aisle, completely blind to the psychological landmines they're about to spend decades navigating. They see the beauty, the charm, the intoxicating passion, but they miss the critical warning signs that scream danger ahead in a language they were never taught to understand. Today, I'm going to decode the female psychology that turns marriage from paradise into purgatory, because understanding these patterns isn't just about avoiding bad relationships. It's about saving your sanity, your finances, your children's future, and potentially your life. She walks into your life like a hurricane wrapped in silk. The intensity is immediate, overwhelming, addictive. Every conversation feels like you're discovering hidden treasures in her soul. Every touch carries electrical charges that rewire your nervous system. Every moment apart feels like withdrawal from your favorite drug. This isn't love, it's psychological warfare. Jizgizit as homasi. The woman who will destroy your marriage has weaponized her childhood wounds into tools of romantic manipulation. Her chaotic upbringing didn't teach her how to love. It taught her how to create the familiar chaos that her nervous system mistakes for passion. She doesn't seek stability because stability feels foreign, uncomfortable, wrong. Her childhood programmed her with core beliefs that love equals pain, that connection requires conflict, that peace means abandonment is coming. So she manufactures drama, not because she enjoys it, but because her psychological operating system can't function without it. She needs turbulence like a pilot needs air traffic. Without it, she doesn't know how to navigate. This creates the most dangerous relationship dynamic known to modern psychology, the trauma bond. You become addicted to the intense highs and devastating lows because your brain starts associating this emotional roller coaster with deep connection. The passionate makeup sessions after explosive fights feel more meaningful than the quiet contentment of healthy relationships. But here's what your dopamine hijacked brain isn't processing. She's not choosing chaos because she loves you intensely. She's choosing chaos because chaos is the only language her damaged psyche speaks fluently. You're not her soulmate. You're her emotional crash test dummy. Most men approach a woman's childhood stories like they're listening to entertainment, not intelligence. Reports about their future. She tells you about her absent father, her alcoholic mother, her string of failed relationships, and you think you're hearing tragic backstory that explains her complexity. What you're actually hearing is the blueprint for how she'll systematically dismantle your peace of mind. The woman who grew up in chaos carries that chaos in her cellular memory. It lives in her nervous system like a virus, constantly seeking to replicate the familiar patterns of instability. She learned that love comes with conditions, that security is temporary, that people leave when you need them most. These aren't just sad memories. They're active psychological programs running in the background of every interaction you'll ever have. When life gets too stable, too predictable, too healthy, her subconscious will sabotage it because stability triggers her deepest fears of abandonment. She'll pick fights over nothing because conflict feels more familiar than harmony. She'll create emergencies because crisis feels more natural than calm. She'll test your loyalty through increasingly unreasonable demands because disappointment feels safer than trust. The tragedy is that her wounded inner child is driving the relationship. Bus, making decisions based on fears. Formed when she was 7 years old. Your marriage won't be a partnership between two adults. It'll be you constantly managing the emotional weather patterns of someone whose psychological development froze at the moment of her deepest childhood trauma. Here's where most men get completely confused about female psychology. They mistake aggression for strength, chaos for passion, and boundary violations for intimacy. The woman who will ruin your marriage doesn't set healthy boundaries. She either builds impenetrable walls or bulldozes through yours with the subtlety of a natural disaster. Healthy boundaries are relationship instructions that create safety and understanding. They sound like I need some time to process this before we continue the conversation. Or I'd appreciate if we could discuss finances on Sunday evenings when we're both relaxed. Toxic boundaries are weapons disguised as self-care. They sound like I don't tolerate disrespect, so I'm not speaking to you for a week. Or if you can't handle my energy, maybe you're not man enough for me. The boundary bulldozer operates from a place of psychological terrorism. She uses withdrawal of affection, silent treatments, and emotional punishment as tools to train you into submission. She doesn't communicate her needs. She detonates emotional explosives and expects you to figure out what went wrong while you're picking up the pieces. Even more dangerous is her complete inability to respect your boundaries. Your need for sleep becomes evidence of your lack of commitment. Your desire for personal time becomes proof that you don't love her enough. Your requests for respectful communication become attacks on her authentic self-expression. She experiences your boundaries not as reasonable requests for mutual respect, but as personal rejections that trigger her deepest abandonment wounds. So, she'll systematically erode every limit you try to establish until you find yourself living in a psychological prison where her emotional state dictates the rules of reality. Marriage is supposed to be the ultimate team sport. Two people working together towards shared goals, supporting each other's growth, celebrating combined victories. The toxic woman transforms marriage into a gladiator arena where every interaction becomes a battle for dominance, control, and psychological supremacy. She doesn't see your success as family success. She sees it as evidence that you're pulling ahead in some imaginary competition. Your achievements trigger her insecurities, so she'll minimize your accomplishments, remind you of your failures, or create crises that steal focus from your victories. When you express concerns about the relationship instead of cooperation, you get warfare. Your feelings become ammunition she uses against you. Your vulnerabilities become weapons in her psychological arsenal. Your attempts at intimacy become opportunities for her to establish emotional dominance. This competitive dynamic poisons everything. She can't celebrate your promotions because they threaten her sense of control. She can't support your friendships because they represent resources being diverted from her. She can't encourage your hobbies because they create spaces in your life where she isn't the center of attention. The most insidious aspect of this competition is how she frames your reasonable requests as attempts to control her. Ask her to communicate more kindly, and you're trying to suppress her authentic expression. Request more physical affection, and you're being demanding and needy. Express hurt over her behavior, and you're manipulating her with your emotions. She's reframed cooperation as oppression, turning every attempt at healthy relationship dynamics into evidence of your inadequacy as a partner. You stop making requests because the cost of asking becomes higher than the cost of going without. The woman who will destroy your marriage has turned self-sabotage into an art form, but she's perfected the technique of making her sabotage look like your failure. She creates problems, then positions herself as the victim of the chaos she manufactured. She'll start fights right before important events. Your job interview, your mother's birthday, your friend's wedding then. Act confused about why you seem stressed. During these occasions, she'll manufacture financial crisis through impulsive spending, then blame you for not being a better provider when money gets tight. The timing is never accidental. Her subconscious has developed sophisticated radar for detecting moments when life feels too good, too stable, too promising. That's when the sabotage protocols activate, creating familiar chaos that feels more manageable than unfamiliar peace. She sabotages success because success means change, and change triggers her deepest fears of abandonment. If you get that promotion, maybe you'll realize you can do better than her. If the relationship gets too happy, maybe you'll become complacent and leave. If life gets too easy, maybe you'll stop fighting for her, which she's learned to interpret as love. This creates a psychological prison where happiness becomes the enemy. Every good day carries the threat of impending sabotage. Every achievement gets contaminated by the anticipation of how she'll turn it into a source of conflict. You start unconsciously limiting your own success to avoid triggering her sabotage mechanisms. You turn down opportunities, minimize achievements, and shrink your dreams to fit the narrow parameters of what her damaged psyche can tolerate without detonating. Living with a psychologically toxic woman is like being trapped in a region with violent, unpredictable weather patterns. You never know if you're waking up to sunshine or tornadoes, but you're always checking the emotional barometer and adjusting your behavior based on atmospheric conditions you can't control. Her mood becomes the climate that determines everything else in your shared environment. Good mood means everyone can relax and enjoy temporary peace. Bad mood means lockdown protocols activate and everyone tiptoes around, trying not to trigger the storm. The most exhausting aspect of this dynamic is how her emotional weather always seems to be your fault. If she's angry, it's because you did something wrong. If she's sad, it's because you're not supportive enough. If she's anxious, it's because you're not providing adequate security. You become a meteorologist of her moods, studying patterns and trying to predict when the next emotional hurricane will hit. You develop early warning systems, evacuation plans, and survival strategies for weathering her psychological storms. But here's what you don't realize until it's too late. You're not her partner in this dynamic. You're her emotional captive. She's not sharing her feelings with you. She's using her feelings to control the temperature of your shared reality. She confuses intensity with intimacy, chaos with connection, possession with love. The toxic woman creates counterfeit closeness that feels profound in the moment, but leaves you emotionally bankrupt over time. Real intimacy requires vulnerability, trust, and mutual respect. It grows slowly through shared experiences, honest communication, and consistent emotional safety. It feels calm, secure, grounding, like coming home after a long journey. Counterfeit intimacy feels like drowning and being rescued simultaneously. It's the desperate clinging that happens during fights, followed by passionate reconciliation. It's the feeling that you know each other's souls because you've seen each other's worst moments. It's the addiction to drama disguised as deep connection. She creates artificial intimacy through trauma bonding, making you feel like partners in surviving her emotional chaos rather than companions, enjoying life's journey together. You mistake the intensity of managing her psychological storms for the depth of true partnership. This counterfeit connection becomes addictive because it triggers powerful neurochemical responses. Your brain floods with bonding hormones during the reunion phases, creating physical addiction to the cycle of separation and reconnection. Real intimacy feels too quiet, too stable, too boring compared to the chemical highs of trauma bonding. You start believing that relationships without constant drama lack passion, depth, or authenticity. The toxic woman doesn't enter relationships to build something beautiful together. She enters to extract resources, emotional, financial, social, and psychological. She's not looking for a partner. She's looking for a host organism that can sustain her while she continues her pattern of taking without reciprocating. She'll drain your emotional reserves through constant crises that require your attention, energy, and support. Every conversation becomes about her problems, her needs, her feelings, her perspectives. Your inner world gets relegated to supporting character status in the ongoing drama of her life. Financially, she operates like a resource extraction company. She'll spend your money like it's hers while treating her money like it's off limits. To shared expenses, she'll create financial emergencies through poor decisions, then expect you to solve them without complaint or consequence. Socially, she'll isolate you from friends and family who might offer perspective on her behavior. She'll create conflicts with people who care about you, forcing you to choose between her comfort and your support systems. Eventually, your entire social world revolves around managing her relationships and maintaining her emotional stability. The most insidious extraction is psychological. She'll mine your insecurities, fears, and vulnerabilities for ammunition to use during future conflicts. Your private confessions become public weapons. Your moments of weakness become evidence of your inadequacy. If you think the damage stops with you, you're catastrophically wrong. Children raised in homes with psychologically toxic mothers become collateral damage in wars they never sign up to fight. She'll use children as emotional support animals, expecting them to regulate her moods and provide the unconditional love she never learned to give herself. She'll parentify them, making them responsible for her emotional well-being while neglecting their developmental needs. The children learn that love comes with chaos, that relationships require walking on eggshells, that other people's emotions are their responsibility to manage. They develop hypervigilance, anxiety, and dysfunctional relationship patterns that they'll carry into their own future partnerships. She'll weaponize the children during conflicts, using them as messengers, allies, or emotional shields. She'll undermine your authority as a father while simultaneously expecting you to enforce consequences. When her permissive parenting creates behavioral problems, the most heartbreaking aspect is how she'll damage your relationship with your children through constant triangulation, manipulation, and emotional poisoning. They'll learn to associate your attempts at healthy boundaries with causing their mother distress. Divorce from a toxic woman isn't just the end of a marriage. It's financial warfare designed to punish you for daring to escape her control. She'll fight for every asset, not because she needs them, but because taking them from you feels like victory. The family court system becomes her weapon of choice, where her victim narrative and emotional manipulation can be weaponized against your attempts at reasonable resolution. She'll drag out proceedings, rack up legal fees, and fight over items worth less than the cost of litigation simply to inflict maximum financial damage. Alimony becomes lifetime punishment for the crime of trying to build a life with someone incapable of partnership. Child support becomes a tool for maintaining financial control over your future earnings while she restricts your access to the children those payments supposedly support. She'll violate custody agreements, create false allegations, and use the legal system as an extension of the psychological abuse that defined your marriage. Every interaction becomes another opportunity to drain your resources and energy. In our hyperconnected world, the toxic woman transforms technology from tools of convenience into weapons of psychological warfare. Her smartphone becomes a device for maintaining secret communications, documenting your every mistake, and building cases against your character. She'll screenshot private conversations to share with friends who validate her victim narrative. She'll record arguments out of context to make you appear unreasonable or aggressive. She'll maintain elaborate digital files, documenting every instance where you failed to meet her impossible standards. Social media becomes her primary battlefield for reputation destruction. She'll post cryptic messages about being unappreciated, share inspirational quotes about surviving toxic relationships, and cure an online presence that positions her as a long-suffering saint dealing with your inadequacies. The most insidious aspect is how she uses technology to maintain connections with potential replacement partners. While monitoring your every digital move, she'll demand access to your passwords while guarding hers with national security level secrecy. Your phone becomes subject to random inspections while hers remains off-limits territory. She weaponizes children's devices using family tracking apps not for safety but for surveillance. She monitors your communications with mutual friends, colleagues, and family members, gathering intelligence about your relationships and using that information to manipulate social dynamics. The constant psychological warfare doesn't just damage your mental health. It systematically destroys your physical well-being through chronic stress that rewrites your biological systems. Living with a toxic woman is like subjecting your body to a continuous low-level poisoning that accumulates over years. Your sleep patterns become irregular as you develop hypervigilance, always listening for signs of impending emotional storms. Your digestive system suffers from the constant stress, hormones flooding your bloodstream. Your immune system weakens under the relentless assault of psychological pressure. She'll undermine your attempts at self-care, interpreting your exercise routines as attempts to attract other women, your healthy eating as criticism of her choices, your stress management techniques as evidence that you're not fully committed to the relationship. Medical appointments become sources of conflict because time spent addressing your health needs represents resources diverted from her emotional demands. She'll minimize your physical symptoms, dismiss your health concerns, or create emergencies that prevent you from seeking medical care. The most devastating aspect is how she programs you to ignore your body's warning signals. You learn to push through exhaustion, ignore pain, and suppress your biological needs to avoid triggering her emotional reactions. Your body becomes a casualty of war in the battlefield of your relationship. Even after escape, the psychological architecture she built in your mind continues operating like malware in your emotional operating system. You've been conditioned to anticipate chaos, manage impossible moods, and accept treatment that violates every principle of human dignity. You develop complex PTSD from years of psychological warfare disguised as marriage. Simple decisions feel overwhelming because you've lost touch with your own preferences after years of subordinating them to her emotional weather patterns. Your ability to trust your own perceptions has been systematically undermined through years of gaslighting, emotional manipulation, and reality distortion. You question your memories, doubt your feelings, and second-guess your reactions to situations. Future relationships suffer because your nervous system has been rewired to associate calm with impending disaster. Kindness with manipulation and consistency with boredom. Healthy women feel foreign, wrong, inadequate compared to the intensity you've been conditioned to interpret as love. The signs are always there in the beginning, hidden in plain sight like landmines marked with flowers. She'll tell you about her string of failed relationships, but frame herself as the victim of men who couldn't handle her intensity. She'll describe her family as crazy or toxic, but position herself as the only sane person in a house of dysfunction. Pay attention to how she treats service workers, how she talks about former friends, how she handles minor frustrations. The woman who explodes at baristas over wrong coffee orders will eventually explode at you over much smaller infractions. Notice her relationship with boundaries, both setting them and respecting yours. Does she communicate needs clearly or create elaborate tests to see if you can read her mind? Does she respect your time, space, and autonomy? Or does she treat your boundaries as personal attacks? Watch how she handles conflict in the early stages. Does she seek resolution and understanding, or does she seek to win at all costs? Does she take responsibility for her role in problems? Or does she always find ways to make everything someone else's fault? If you recognize these patterns in your current relationship, understand that love cannot fix psychological damage this profound. Your devotion will not heal her childhood trauma. Your consistency will not teach her to trust. Your patience will not rewire her neural pathways. The only chance for change requires her to acknowledge the damage, commit to intensive therapy, and do years of difficult internal work to rebuild her psychological foundation. This rarely happens because the toxic woman's operating system interprets any suggestion of personal growth as evidence that you don't accept her authentic self. Your choice is binary. Accept that this is how your life will be until one of you dies, or develop an exit strategy that protects your sanity, finances, and children. There is no middle ground with profound psychological toxicity. The path to freedom requires rebuilding your own psychological foundation, reconnecting with your authentic preferences and boundaries, and learning to recognize healthy relationship dynamics. It means accepting that the intense connection you thought was love was actually sophisticated psychological manipulation. Most importantly, it means understanding that choosing peace over passion, stability over intensity, and health over familiarity isn't settling. It's finally choosing life over slow motion suicide. Never marry a woman whose childhood trauma has become your relationship's operating system. Never marry a woman who mistakes chaos for intimacy, competition for partnership, or emotional terrorism for authentic expression. Never marry a woman who sees your boundaries as barriers to overcome, rather than instructions for loving you well. Your future self, your children, and your bank account will thank you for having the courage to recognize these patterns before they become the permanent architecture of your life. Because in the end, the most expensive relationship mistake isn't marrying the wrong woman. It's staying married to her long enough to forget what healthy love actually feels like. The choice is yours, but the consequences will echo through generations. Choose wisely, because some mistakes you can only make once before they remake you entirely.